In my last video, I talked about how several companies sold Nintendo clone consoles and bootleg cartridges in Brazil legally, before Nintendo had an official distributor here. Today, I want to focus on a specific example of this practice to discuss how this state of things affected the perception of Brazilian consumers about the gaming market. In 1990, CCE, or CCE as we say it here, released their second and third generation console, the top game VG9000. It was the successor of the VG8000, a Famicom in a black shell and controllers resembling the ones for the Coleco Gemini. The main selling point of the VG9000 was its so-called double system. Differently from all its competitors and even its predecessor, the console had two cartridge slots, one for Famicom games, the other for NES games, dispensing any kind of adapters. The slots have a sliding lid that leaves only one slot open at a given time, to prevent players from trying to see if they could make Mario a playable character in a Dragon Quest game, for instance. Inside the box, besides the console, controllers and a packing game, Tiger Hell in my case, you would find a catalog with all games released by CCE available at that time. For each game, you would find an image that was also used as a cartridge's label, a brief text describing the game and number of players, and the size of the game in kilobits or megabits. I used to spend a lot of time browsing this catalog, imagining how each game would look and play like. For instance, Rockman 2 must be some sort of boxing game where you play as a blonde guy in a red jacket fighting an ice giant, right? But today I want to focus on the second page. In it you see three games, 1942, 1943 and 1944. It is clearly a trilogy, right? What are these about? Let's read what the descriptions say.
1942. This game is a World War II aerial combat simulator. Your mission is to destroy the enemy aircraft carriers and airplanes to defend your country.
Mine? I didn't know Japan sent airplanes to attack Brazil.
With this mission completed, you get another even harder one. Prepare to destroy the enemy. Their attacks are quick and devastating. Watch out for one or two players.
Okay, what about the second one?
1943. Go back in time and put yourself in command of a World War II combat airplane. Your mission is to destroy the enemy aircraft carriers and airplanes to defend your country.
Now that again?
Prepare to take the enemy down for one or two players.
Well, looks almost the same, right? Let's see the third one.
1944. This game is a World War II aerial combat simulator created by the very own Japanese who fought the war. Your mission is to destroy the enemy aircraft carriers and airplanes to defend your country.
Is it Japan then?
With this mission completed, you get another even harder one. Prepare to destroy the enemy for one player.
It sounds a lot similar to the first description, except for the Japanese developers thing. So yeah, this definitely seems like a trilogy to me. Let's see what these games are really about. 1942 is a World War II vertically scrolling shoot-'em-up developed by Capcom and released in the arcades in 1984. The player controls an American pilot called Super Race, flying a P-38 Lightning during the Battle of Midway, which took place in 1942 in the Pacific Theater of World War II. So, you have Japanese developers portraying themselves as a bad guy in the game apparently to please Western audiences. Weird, huh? The game was ported to several different platforms. The NES port was done by Micronix and released in 1985 and is widely regarded as a bad port. But in all fairness, it isn't that different from the source material. The arcade release had better graphics and sound, but the gameplay is essentially the same. One button to shoot, the other to make a loop. You can collect power-ups that make your plane have double the firepower or have smaller planes to aid you. One hit and you're dead, and you start with 3 lives. Lose all of them and you have infinite continues. 32 levels of endless waves of airplanes to take down. The music in the arcade version sounded like some military march played only with a whistle and a snare, and was annoying already. In the NES version, it sounds like some Morse code or something. The background graphics may seem a bit dull since it's all blue because you're flying over the sea, but you will prefer it looks always like that, because once you fly over land, it becomes really hard to see those green planes coming at you. The game can be played by 2 players taking turns. Let's see the next one. 1943, The Battle of Midway is the sequel to 1942 and was released in the arcades in 1985. The real Battle of Midway took place in 1942, so the title is a bit misleading. The graphics are better than before, and this time we have real music. with an extremely catchy first level tune. The NES port was done by Capcom themselves this time. I guess they felt the predecessor suffered from the third-party porting, and it's just as good if not better than the arcade release. Of course, some minor sacrifices had to be made, like removing animations from the cutscenes, but the downgrade in graphics and sound is a small price to pay for the improvements in gameplay. You start by customizing your plane, choosing where to spend 3 points in different traits. This time, you shoot with one button, but if you hold it, you release a charged shot that looks like you're firing lasers. The second button releases a special lightning, cyclone or tsunami attack. Pressing both buttons make a loop. Besides the regular weapon, players can also collect special weapons that will last for a limited time. No more one-hit deaths. Instead, you have an energy meter that is depleted over time by being hit and with the use of the special attack. On the other hand, you have only one life. If you die, the game gives you a password to continue from where you stopped. Like the previous game, 2 players can take turns. Okay, time for the last game in the trilogy. 1944, The Loop Master was released in the arcades in 2000 and is also a vertically scrolled. Wait. What? That catalog is from 1990. How is that even possible? Could it be that Capcom first released it on the NES and later ported to the arcades? Well, if you check game databases such as Moby Games, you will see that no. This was the 5th in the main series and it was only released for the arcades. So what game is that 1944 in the catalog? Let's check it out. The title screen is simple enough and states clearly that this is a single-player game. The second screen is very similar to the one we saw in 1943, and yeah, it's all written in Japanese because the ROMs for this one are all Famicom ROMs. Well, it seems we're playing 1943 here, but wait, something's different. The weapon is in auto-fire mode when you keep the button pressed, instead of charging that laser shot. The laser shot is in the second button. The only way to perform the special attacks is pressing both buttons at the same time, but that's the only clear difference here. So yeah, this is a ROM hack, a commercially released ROM hack. Well, as I said in my previous video, there were many games that were hacked and released commercially in Brazil, but those hacks were not advertised as a different game such as in this case. And obviously, CCL wasn't the only Brazilian company to release it. In fact, it isn't clear who was responsible for this hack, but this probably wasn't done by a Brazilian company, as you can easily find Asian 1944 cartridges. It was also included in some multi-game cartridges, as it was common practice to include hacked ROMs in those. Now imagine that one of those 1944 cartridges was sold in Japan back in the day. I imagine the average Japanese consumer is familiar with the Famicom catalog and could easily spot this as a bootleg release. But that's not what happened in Brazil. Without an official distributor, left in the hands of local companies, the market for Nintendo games consisted in whatever the local companies decided to release. So even a bootleg cartridge such as 1944 could be considered a legitimate entry in the NES or Famicom catalog, as it was advertised along the officially released 1942 and 1943. To give you one more example of how those pirate games were almost indistinguishable from official ones, take another look at those top 10 best-selling games lists I've shown you in my previous video. Battletoads is the number 1 game in those lists. But look what game is in the 3rd place here. It's DJ Boy. DJ Boy is a beat-em up released by Coneco in the arcades in 1990, and later ported to the Mega Drive. But it was never released for the NES, so was the magazine mistaken? No. DJ Boy was also the name of a hack of Roller Games, a game released by Ultra Software in the same year. Since both games had a roller skating protagonist who went about punching people, it was easy to cash in on the popularity of a 16-bit title by just renaming a somewhat similar game. Video Game Magazine even reviewed the ROM hack, but I guess later the magazine acknowledged the mistake, as they started to put the real name of the game in parentheses on their most popular games list. So it is almost as if living in Brazil in the 90s was like living in an alternate universe where there was no clear line between pirate and official titles, where DJ Boy was ported to the NES and the 1940 series was actually a trilogy on that platform. Maybe it is similar to how differently Japanese and American audiences think about the sequence of releases in the Super Mario Bros. Series or the Final Fantasy series, meaning that the way products are advertised ends up shaping how people perceive and interact with them. One could argue that both the Japanese and the Americans are right about how they order the Final Fantasy releases, for example, as the way Nintendo of America and Nintendo of Japan decided to release those games dictated how their customers perceived the reality and the series order. So maybe one could also argue the Brazilians were right in thinking that 1944 and DJ Boy are part of the official NES catalog. And here's the end of another episode. Do you know of any other ROM hack released commercially? If you do, please tell me in the comments below. And if this was interesting to you, please let me know so I can keep doing more. Thanks for watching.